from the University of South Florida. We are the Office of Academic Advocacy. To let you know a little bit about that, we were established at University of South Florida in 2016. It came from the need from performance-based funding. They were looking at first-time and college students and their graduation rates. And so academic advocates were implemented to assist those students who maybe were at risk for not graduating and to work with them and to case manage them. So initially there was the first year team that worked with their FTIC in the first year, and then we had our progression advocates that worked with the Finish in 4 initiative. And from that, we realized there was a need for transfer advocates because it's not going to be long before transferred students are going to be held to that same performance-based funding metric. So that's who you have standing before you today are the transfer advocates. My name is Carly Walters.
I'm Anthea Henderson.
And I'm Andrew Mason. Do you want me to do that part? So we are going to sort of incorporate social media throughout the presentation also. So if you're a tweeter, the hashtag for our session is hashtag transfer case management, MGMT. And so we are monitoring it. So if you have questions, instead of using like a post-it note parking lot, like just parking lot it to Twitter, and then we'll get to that at the very end. It's also going to allow us to continue this conversation after the presentation today.
So to let you know a little bit about what we hope to do tonight, we want to talk about the learning outcomes. So what we hope for you all to get from our presentation. We're going to go over the case study, what the purpose was, where the need came from. And then we're going to do the rubric creation, so what we created from that, and our observations and outcomes, so what we saw after doing this pilot. And then we'd love to facilitate a discussion. We really want to be interactive with you all and hear what you have to say as well. So what we're hoping for you to be able to do is identify ways for you to coordinate outreach efforts that will impact your transfer students. We also want you to explore how to develop coordinated outreach events and follow-up efforts when working with multifaceted populations like transfer students. And we'd also like you to gain insight into improving or initiating your own standardized outreach.
So our approach to inform our work and better serve transfer students is to conduct a case study. And so we began that. We actually initiated that in the fall of 2018. And, excuse me, Carly referenced the performance-based metric, a real important piece in that we know it's coming. And so for us to be able to inform the legislature rather than they impose on us something that's not realistic, we're trying to move pretty quickly and get some good data, some good information. So that's an important piece about this case study. Also, important for us to say that the work that we do is based on a case management model for student success. This model is adapted from the EAB's population health management model, where they began to talk about how can we use what happens in the health management field to inform higher education work, student success. And so we've been able to really dig into that and do some good work at USF. Again, it initially came in focusing on the FTICs, and so our work is to really show how it can best serve transfer students. So we want to be able to look at the benefits of really working with our students at a higher level. How does this work when we have a strategic plan, a strategic approach rather, that's organized? How does that benefit our students? And it also, we hope, and has in many ways, it will improve our ability to track the students, where they are, where they're going, and how they're doing. It allows us to have a consistent outreach approach, as well as be able to quickly identify our students and move through that process quickly, immediately, rather, excuse me. I'm using 2 sets of notes, excuse me. Excuse me. And if I call, please do excuse me. And then, this approach, we hope, and so this is part of the case study, we're wanting to ensure that the work that we do with transfer students is proactive and personalized. And one of the things is we talk about the uniqueness of students. So even though it's strategic, even though there's consistency, the way that we work with the students allows us to really give them some individualized focus and support. And so there's been some real value in that process. Standardized, and so we're able to really optimize on how we address students when we do it, ensure that there's timeliness, and better able to eliminate the guesswork. And we put that there, and I wanted to focus on that specifically because very often we're sort of wondering, what do they need? Where are they? How are they doing? And so by using this particular approach, and hopefully we'll help you to see that and understand how that worked, we eliminate that guesswork and better understand what's going on with students.
Thank you. So in our case study, of course, we needed to look at a needs assessment first. What are we actually trying to fix here? What are we looking at? So at the University of South Florida, the majority of our emphasis, as with most of your institutions, I'm sure, funding and strategic initiatives have been pushed towards the FTIC population. And so we knew that there was a gap here, even within our own office. Our office, as Carly was mentioning, it was set up on a case management model and initially was only focused on FTIC retention and persistence. But again, with 60% of the population at USF being transfer students, we knew that we were not touching the majority of our students. And so we decided to align that same model that we were using in the FTIC population, and we decided to apply it to our transfer students just to see how that would work for a semester. And so that was really the gap that we determined in our needs assessment. We all know, we're here at a conference dedicated to them, that transfer students present a unique set of challenges to four-year institutions. We've heard conversations so far about academic preparedness as far as rigor is concerned, about articulation agreements not, being held up completely. We've heard all these conversations. So transfer students are going to inevitably bring in unique circumstances to a four-year institution. And more than that, or more importantly than that rather, there's obviously a noted sense of urgency when we work with this population in particular. Not only are they just facing their own academic, but also personal and social concerns are more prevalent within the transfer population. And there's also a significant impact on success as far as a timely graduation is concerned. And so with that sense of urgency, we knew that not just semester, but every week is really critical in our work that we do with our transfer students. So transfer students in the state of Florida, as with most places, are, again, alluding to these performance-based metrics. The expectation is they will graduate from USF in 4 semesters. That is our hardened expectation. The drop-dead expectation is 6 semesters. So we are looking at a very tight window here. That narrow window reduces the ability for a student to really explore options. They pretty much have to hit the ground running with everything figured out as soon as they walk through our door. And more importantly, that tight window limits their ability to build resiliency. And so what we mean by that is if a student, an FTIC student, has a bad first semester, they've got 7 more to rebound, right? If our transfer students come in and even in that first semester, if they have even a half rocky semester, that could potentially impact them for the rest of the time they're with us. We work with students all the time that come in, get on academic probation their first semester, and pretty much stay on it through graduation. It's very possible. And this is all a scenario I'm sure that most of you are familiar with. And when these transfer students show up on our radars, particularly within the work that our office does, they are showing up with what we call a confluence of issues. So it's not just a singular solution that we're looking to apply to these students.
Thank you. So we've been talking about this rubric and this process, this way that we're approaching case management for our students. And one of the things that we've done is refined the existing rubric, the one that's there to serve FTICs. And what we've been able to do is stratify the risk based on the things we see happening with students and how it's impacting their progression. So we've been able to adjust that, as well as more appropriately address the concerns that they bring. Because as we know, while they have some very similar concerns to those students that are traditionally the first time in college, they come with a lot more, and we'll deal with that in a few. And then we're able to create what we call differentiated care pathways and a protocol to address that, meaning that based on the level of risk, and you'll see that again later, but based on the level of risk, how do we manipulate the work that's done with those students? How do we help them to navigate the systems? How do we help by removing barriers that impact them? So again, according to the risk, there's a pathway that aligns with it to support what they may need. And then we implemented this, as we said, the case, and again, we've been using the case management model because we, as transfer advocates, we started, and one of us started in 2017, but we became a full team a year ago, essentially. And so we've been doing it, but we've been doing it the way it existed. And we began to realize that it wasn't necessarily working. So in the fall of 2018, we made the decision to do a case study and see what we can get from that to be able to, again, inform our leadership and hopefully better serve students by creating policies and more programs to support transfer students. So the rubric is designed so that there's a low, medium, high risk. You go to the hospital and you're triaged. And based on that level of care that's needed, you may wait for 10 hours or 5 minutes. We don't do that with the transfer students, but realistically, that's what happens in the emergency room sometimes. But in all seriousness, some of the students that come to us, we realize they're low risk. And low risk meaning that there's some fairly normal issues. Some of the things, not really attending. Maybe their grades have dropped just a little at midterm. Major is not aligning well with maybe what their interests are. And study skills may be needed, as well as maybe fail a class, but they have a pretty strong GPA. And they aren't necessarily considered critical issues, and they typically can be dealt with through a referral. So they don't necessarily need the case management, but they do need to be connected with the appropriate persons who can maybe help them. Some of them are able to adjust and get back on track, but some of them need a little, just a reminder, talk to the professor, go to the Academic Success Center, go to the Writing Skills Center, those sorts of things. So typically those are low risk, and again, not necessarily needing the amplified model of case management. And then we have the medium risk. It will directly impact their academic progress if something doesn't happen. And so we begin to look at the issues escalating. So maybe the things that were happening at the low risk, those have happened, but they've happened because maybe there's some wellness issues, medical concerns that are moderately consistent, transportation, employment, financial, food insecurity, excess withdrawal attempts. So it says there's some mini crisis happening. And as we know, with Maslow's laws, if those needs aren't met, that's a total distraction. Who wants to study when I have no food? Or I don't have access to finances? I can't get to class. And, the major that I have is face-to-face. There's not an option with online, and so maybe there needs to be some realignment. And we even begin to look at that as we talk even about the major situation. Does there need to be a conversation about a major that might better align with your situation, your circumstances? And we tend to be the ones that have that conversation. We have the academic advisors, and they do their piece. But we were in our colleagues' presentation earlier, and there was a question about how do you have that type of conversation. It so happens that in our office, we come to it with a number of skills, that are beyond the advising skills, and so we have some backgrounds that lend us the skill and the competence to have some significant conversations with students that really allow them to see their strengths differently than maybe what they anticipated them to be. And additional medium concerns, again, personal conflicts, and I spoke about measures. So again, things that really impact and will impact their progression if not addressed. Now the high, it's pretty urgent. And so again, some of that other stuff might be going on, but here we go now talking about elevated wellness and medical concerns. We've had students, they're hospitalized. I just got an email about a student that's been hospitalized and been trying to reach out to them because grades have plummeted. Instructors are saying he's not attending class. We can find him. Sure enough, he's in the hospital. Poor grades while on probation, which typically means they're going to be academically dismissed. And many transfer students miss that piece that it can happen that quickly, unfortunately. And then coming back in takes some strategy. Sometimes there's some situations like wellness where there can be what we have called a petition to really help them get back in, but sometimes they actually have to stay out a year and go through a process that we call academic renewal. Housing insecurity, death of a family member, and so often that happens and they don't necessarily share it with someone, and then you realize there's something going on, they're in trouble. Sometimes that death doesn't hit a student until a semester or two later. And then we, then understand what's been going on, because it has to be when they're ready to share it, when they're ready to talk about it. And then we have a large number of international students who are often at risk of losing visa because there are a number of reasons. If they're not at full enrollment, full credit enrollment, if they're not doing well in the major that they're sponsored to do. And so those take some really intricate work to help them. And then, of course, victim of a violent crime. And, we have our victims assistance. So with this group, we tend to need the entire team. And Andrew's going to talk about that team a little bit later. But essentially, that's what the case management really begins to look like. And we, as the case management of the academic piece, are really trying to ensure that all of the other care partners that can deal with and support the other things that they need are doing so, while we attempt to determine if their academic piece can be rectified, if they really need to step out for a bit, whatever needs to happen to support that student the best way. Does there need to be another major? So we're actually, the partners, we're working with them, and this particular level, high level, takes some tremendous coordination and communication ongoing, and we really monitor these students, particularly when we begin the case from medium. Once we begin that case management process, we're actually, there's a case that we open in the system that we have, so that we're constantly monitoring to make sure that they're okay. If they're not, we continue to provide whatever support, but if they are, at least we're checking on them.
So where do our students come from? How do we get them to us, and how do they show up for us? So we've created what we call, or we call this our sources of interaction. We have 3 different areas that we determine as sources of interaction for our students. The first is historical data and live data, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. And then we also use a system called Archivum. It's developed by Appian. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's essentially our in-house advising / CRM, advising note management. It really does live primarily as a system for referrals. And so if a student has been assigned what we call our care team, campus partners, if you're on the student's care team, you can absolutely send a referral to us if you are meeting with that student in an advising capacity or in a housing capacity, and something's just not right academically. You can send a referral to us through the Archivum system, and then we can take a deeper dive and reach out to the student and then invite them in. So that's one way that we get our students in. The newest initiative started as a pilot last summer. It launched fully in the fall, and it's our instructor Canvas button. So for those of you on Canvas, it's similar to Blackboard if you're not. Right in the instructor shell, our IT group has embedded an instructor referral button so that all the instructors have to do if they notice someone's not coming to class anymore, or if they were performing well and now they're not, all they got to do is just touch that referral instructor button, their photo roster pops up, they put in a little blurb about what's going on, and that auto generates to their assigned advocate. So in our office, we're getting real-time referrals, so much so that Anthea, Carly, and I, our inbox has not stopped because this is about week 6 at school, so all the midterm stuff's right on the verge. So we have been getting referrals nonstop even while we're here. So that instructor Canvas referral is probably one of our number one sources of interaction. And again, that just launched last fall officially. We also have a process called intake, where if a student either heard of us by word of mouth as a self-referral, or maybe from a friend or from some of our tabling efforts, they can refer themselves. Just say, hey, I've got a lot of stuff going on, and academic advising alone isn't quite answering my questions. I'm having some housing and finance issues and all that together. So students can self-refer to our office. Or they can be referred from anyone else in the university community. So we work closely with several partners, which we'll talk about here. Again, they can either send those referrals via Archivum, or they might just float the idea out to the student. Hey, this office exists. When you're ready to go to that office, here's their information. So that's why we have it as 2 different buckets as far as our interactions concerned. I'm a data person, so I love dealing with data, and this is where our predictive factors come in. So we actually are using several, both live and historic data, to both aggregate and a lot of times to break down some of the trends that we see. So the first is that we get live reporting from Canvas. We port that in through the Civitas platform. So as instructors are updating grades, we see their grades live. If I'm meeting with a student, about 2 minutes where they walk through my door, I pull up their Civitas page and I see exactly what their grades are. So when I say, how's it going in history? Oh, it's cool. I'm like, really? Because what that grade shows us is what their current grade is and what the class average is. Because sometimes a student has a 0, but that's because the instructor ain't putting grades in. That's easy to deal with, right? But then sometimes a student has a 40 and everyone else has a 90, and you're like, something's up here. So that is probably one of the easiest things for us to look at and just be able to know what's going on with the student academically. We pull web reports for students who aren't registered at certain benchmarks. Students get canceled for non-payment. Again, going back to our international students, this is a particular concern because they lose visa status. So we work very aggressively with those students to try to get them to make sure that their account is brought back up and they're reinstated in courses. We pull hold inquiries, midterm grades. Anytime students try to withdraw above their threshold at USF, above 60 hours, they're only limited to 2 withdrawals. Once they hit those 2, say that again. Beyond 60 hours, 2 withdrawals, period. So you get 3 below, 2 above. And so anytime a student goes to initiate, that's not medical withdrawals and things like that. So withdrawals with cause, those don't count. But self-initiated withdrawals, you only get 2. So if you've already used those up and you go to try to do a 3rd one, it pings us automatically. Hey, John's trying to withdraw from a 3rd class. Go figure out what's up. Students are on academic probation. No, you're good. It's a web report that we pull from, we use like a banner-based system. So it's a web report that we pull every other day. It's like Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of report that we pull to see who in the past 48 hours has tried to withdraw over the limit. We also have determined as a part of this case study, one of the factors we didn't think to necessarily look at, but it started showing up for us quite a bit, was the number of prior institutions. So we've noticed that the higher that number is, there's probably some more associated risk. That's probably not a shocker to you. It's just something we didn't go in thinking to look for, and it's something that became pretty evident. And then additionally, we use the Civitas predictive analytics. So Civitas will give us a prediction score of how likely the student is to persist. When that number is low, they automatically show up for us in our weekly outreach that we need to be touching these students. So to Anthea's point, once we've placed them somewhere in a risk stratification, once we've triaged that student, then we need to know how we're going to better inform our work. So again, for those low-risk students, this is again on the EAB model for health or for management, for case management. Those low levels, they're probably going to just have their stuff worked out naturally, or with the smallest little nudge, like, hey, go see advising, right? The smallest little nudge will typically work for those low-risk stratification cases. The moderate and the high is where we have to jump in. So the moderate, it's more like a, hey, we are here for you. We really want to offer you these services. Please come in so we can help you navigate what's going on. For the high, it's not usually so casual. It's a little bit more like, hey, you need to be in my office like tomorrow if possible for us to figure this out. So again, our tone changes, who we work with changes, the sense of urgency changes. All these things change once we've assigned a student to a particular level of risk. So we talk a lot about campus partners, and I'm sure most of you have a similar setup with your campus partners at your institutions. Probably one of the biggest ones we work with is academic advising. We like to think of our office as being the folks that can take some of the advising load off their plate. We know that advisors are having like these astronomical caseload assignments, and so we know that they don't have time to case manage every student, but we do. And so when an advisor is working with a student and things are getting a little too complicated and they're going to have to call 4 to 5 offices to get this figured out, that's when they contact us. Academic Success Center is our home to the Writing Center and tutoring services, career services, financial aid, more importantly, financial education. So this is getting at the long-term financial literacy piece, because a lot of our students have no financial literacy coming in. And so financial education steps in to say, cool, you got financial aid, now what? Doesn't mean go out and buy a new MacBook every semester. We don't have a lot of students living on campus as transfers, but when they do, that is our number one source of intervention because they are right there where they're living. So working closely with housing is really key. Library research staff, we know that students coming from a community state college to USF, which is listed as a Research 1 institution, that there are often gaps in their ability for writing and often there are gaps for research. And so we make a lot of referrals to research librarians over in the library just to set up their librarians love people to use them, if you don't know that. It is a lost art. So they love it when you send them referrals. So that is probably another huge sort of secret that we have, is students don't even know the power of the librarians that exist on your campus. New Student Connections has a peer advising system set up for basically engagement opportunities. So students that are feeling like not connected or having a lack of affinity to the school, this is where New Student Connections pops in. And then our number one partner for sure is Student Outreach and Support, SOS. SOCAT operates as our BIT team at USF, the Behavior Intervention Team. So this is when students are dealing with some wellness concerns. They're probably working with their office first and then our office second. We're working in tandem with them behind the scenes at all times. But if a student presents to our office because of academic referral, but they get in front of us and we're like, oh, there's some wellness stuff going on. You just got out of the hospital. Okay, you need to also be working with SOS. So we are not social workers, and SOS works more on that model.
All right. So now that we had created that rubric, we wanted to standardize our outreach. We wanted it across the board, be able to say, as a transfer team, this is how we're outreaching to these students. So we created an if-then model. Send an email. If the student responds, create a case. If they don't, wait a certain amount of days, make a phone call. What we realized in doing this is we cast the net a little too wide. It was kind of a go big or go home approach, and at the end of the day, we kind of wanted to go home because it was way too much. We were doing way too many touch points for the student because we were thinking they need us, they want us, we have to find these students. And we were exhausting ourselves in the process because even just with an instructor referrals, any one of us could get 20 to 30 just instructor referrals a week. And so trying to hit a student so many different times through email and phone calls, we realized we were not making the best use of our time. It started to feel really intense, and just for example, for a high-risk student, we were going to do 5 touch points within a week. Started to feel a little intense, a little bit creepy. We wanted to back off. And also, we were meeting weekly to say, how is this feeling for you? What does it look like for you in your day-to-day work? And we were all realizing we felt fatigued. We had good intentions with what we wanted to do with our phone calls and outreach, but it just wasn't working, so we decided to scale back. What we found worked better was lower touch points. So for a low-risk student, 2 outreaches maybe 2 emails over the course of 2 weeks. Typically, that worked well. For a medium risk student, we would do 2 emails and a phone call, and that seemed to work pretty well. And then finally, for the high-risk students, we would do the same 2 emails and a call, but within a shorter time frame, maybe closer to a week. This allowed us to better use our time, and it felt manageable. And this is what you all have in your handout as well. So what we found is less is sometimes more. An email and a phone call tended to work the best because you'd send that initial email and wait a few days and then make that phone call and be like, hey, I'm just following up on an email I sent. And usually the response would be, oh, yeah, I saw it. I'm so sorry. What's going on? How, who are you? And then we can explain. We're not punitive. We're here to help. And maybe they didn't see it. They get so many emails. They're bombarded. They don't know how to differentiate you from everyone else. So that phone call really did help establish that relationship. Another thing we might do is do a personal nudge to their personal email, keeping in mind FERPA, not putting anything in there that is inappropriate, but maybe saying, hey, check your USF email. There's some good stuff in there. And it allowed us to quantify what we were doing so that when performance-based funding comes and they say, okay, well, what are you doing for these low, medium, and high-risk students? We can say as a team, we have a standard approach to every low-risk student, every medium, and every high-risk student. And it also allowed us to practice self-care. I think when we're in the business of trying to care for others, we forget about ourselves. And it helped us manage our burnout and our compassion fatigue because we weren't kind of running all over the place trying to help every single student in a myriad of different ways. And finally, we realized students will respond when they're ready. No matter how many times you email them or call them, if they're not in a space to answer the phone or respond to that email, it doesn't matter how good intentioned you are. We've found students that you email them in October and somehow around February, they're responding to that email. Good, I'm glad you found it. It was always there. So it took the pressure off of us and allowed us to really focus on what mattered.
Sure.
So some of you are using our Twitter. Woohoo! So where's Kara, Ray? Okay, did I answer your question then? So Kara's question was about how do we work with our BIT team, because clearly when we're talking about high-risk students, there's a confluence of things going on. A lot of them are typically wellness. We are, of course, mandated reporters. So the minute we find out that that's happening, we're also in a place to immediately submit what we call a SOCAT referral to our BIT team. And then we will just email the SOCAT team and say, we're working with them academically, and we're going to put that on pause until you work through wellness issues first. So, of course, the wellness issues are always going to supersede the work that we're doing academically. Kelsey asked, how do we use or how do we work with the Health and Counseling Center in coordinating care? So when we talk about our care partners, we're talking about people in which we share information with. So clearly we can't share information with the counseling center. However, we do what we call walk downs all the time. We're located on the same floor as the counseling center. And so we will just casually take a walk with them right on down to counseling, probably every other appointment, right? So we walk down, and our counseling center staffs an emergency responder at all times, like throughout the working day. And so there's always someone there if it's a really critical issue, or we just set them up with an appointment. We encourage our students to fill out an ROI if they want us to work with their counselor to continue to help. So we didn't list them as a part of our coordinating care team because we can't openly share information with counseling, but we do work really closely with counseling as far as referrals and then getting an ROI to work with them.
How does that look on your reporting for students that you walk down to counseling, or that when they do the ROI for you to share reporting? Previously, I worked with my supervisor wanted me to coordinate with the counseling services and ask them for information about the number of students from my program. And I was like, hey, you can't do that.
Right.
So how does it look? Share something or numbers?
Sure. So one of the things we do is typically if a student is going to also be, again, a walk down, if they're going to be a counseling center, we will put a note in their Archivum account that just says addressed wellness concerns. A very broad general note. That's kind of our internal code to know that we probably did a walk down to counseling. We do not put any of the counseling information, even when we have an ROI, we don't put that in our shared Archivum system. That's all kept in-house and internal for us. But once we work with the assistant director for counseling to get the ROI approved and signed off on, then we will work directly with their counselor to make sure they're going to appointments. That's primarily our number one goal, is to make sure they're showing up. And then also to see if there's anything that a lot of times when they're in counseling and working directly with us, we're probably also chasing after a petition for them to do a withdrawal. And so once we know that their counselor or their provider feels that that threshold of need has been met for us to justify a medical withdrawal, then that's when the counselor typically ropes us back in the conversation to say, in my professional opinion, they need to withdraw from classes. And then they send it to us and we say, great, we can help facilitate that.
Okay, great questions. We'll table those a little bit and come back to, if you have more, you can continue to send them in, tweet them, I think is the language. I don't tweet, so. But I'd like to just have some facilitated discussion to help you process some of the things that we've talked about. And actually, I want to back up a little bit on the counseling piece, I'm sorry, just to say that while we encourage, the student has to be ready. So there's no, you must do it, you know. So there's an agreement that they are ready for it. I do want to say that. So your institutions, I'm imagining there's some student outreach that happens. Can we talk a little bit about what some of your approaches are and what has worked, or what needs improvement? Does anyone have anything they'd like to share?
Thank you. So my name is Devin. I'm from University of Michigan, and we're from the School of Information, which is a pretty small school. We're all very close in proximity to one another, and I'm noticing the burnout because we don't have a structured system, but we always figure out, okay, who has talked to who? Have we heard back from that student? We're kind of doing that in without the rubric, but then also we're not able to recognize when the burnout's, setting in. And then also when to cry uncle. Like, at what point do you say? So we always have to remember to keep coming back to it. Okay, have you heard from the student? Have you heard from the student? So it's a blessing to be very closely located to one another and be in constant communication. Then also the out of structure, I think it's easy to get overwhelmed or not realize when for example, our academic advisor maybe is just spending a lot of time kind of having the same conversations, or I end up having without meaning to, kind of duplicating a conversation she's already had with a student.
Thank you so much. Great points. Recognizing the burnout and trying to really recover from that and determine how best to serve students. And one of the things that I'll say to you that we're able to do that's different, we have a very active, very busy caseload. However, it doesn't look like an academic advisor's caseload, and there's a reason for that. For example, our appointment structure is 1 hour, not 15 minutes, not 30 minutes, for obvious reasons. That's why we're there, because they can't do that, but we can and need to, so that structure allows us that. Much of it is developing relationship, because they're about to disclose stuff that they haven't disclosed, or that's tough to face or tough to deal with. We maintain a very big supply of tissue, seriously, very seriously, because it's just that. You're talking about character changes, there's the breakdown, and we attempt to really help them to see that wherever they are doesn't mean they're failed, but maybe they're gaining. But we've got to first get through what's happening with them to be able to have that type of discussion. Are there other approaches to outreach that another person might like to share?
Yes, I'm from a small private liberal arts university, St. Louis, and we do what's called early alert, so that if an instructor or maybe even a staff member identifies an issue that could turn into a bigger issue, we have a way to contact our Division of Student Success so they can get assistance. One of the challenges is that there's no if you will, notification from like the Office of Admissions where I work to the Division of Student Success, particularly if we identify something that may eventually turn into a bigger issue down the line. And I was kind of interested, I didn't hear it during the presentation, but do you guys work any with the Office of Admission as they're admitting students to maybe identify some issues with students?
So another great question. We don't work directly with the Office of Admissions, but we do work very closely with the Office of Orientation. Unfortunately, it's then, but at least we do that. And so during orientation, we're present, and so there's students that very often find out that maybe they're not accepted into the major that they thought they were. That's huge at orientation, especially when you flew in from New York, and you're now in Tampa, and bags and apartments already gotten and all that. And so we begin that work very early, or we're able to see there's students that go to the major that they've chosen, and for whatever reason, that major is not going to work. And so they may then, of course, need to again talk to us at that particular point. Let me give some, yeah.
I was also just going to add, on the transfer end, it is a little undeveloped at this point. On the FTIC end of the spectrum, we do have what we would consider, we call it a FYR model, the first year risk model. And so based on admissions data, the institution has performed longitudinal studies about what factors in what year impact retention and persistence. And so students that are on a scale in our FYR model are then put into a special cohort that they don't know that they're in, where we're guiding their work just a little bit tighter. And so on the FTIC side, we are working earlier than admissions point, where from the application through, those students would be plopped in our FYR cohort. On the transfer side, actually, our current dean of students that's her dissertation, is taking that FYR model and applying it to a transfer model. And so we're hoping that in the next few years, we'll actually be able to flush out that data to have a very similar model as our successful FYR model. And if you're interested in any of that FTIC work for first-year students, it's Dr. Miller at the University of South Florida, who has a lot of that FYR model for the predictive piece there.
Yeah, thanks, Anthea. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to circle back real quick to what you were speaking to about how do you manage the burnout. I will say that was one of the positive things for creating that outreach protocol, is it took the guilt guesswork out of it, of did I do enough, or did I call enough? I didn't have to worry about that. It was already there, and we were able to kind of go home with a peace of mind of we're doing exactly what we need to do.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. All right. It's okay if you did.
I mean, that's where we're headed, right? So I work at also a small liberal arts institution in Austin, Texas. I'm from St. Edwards. And our approach to some of our outreach, so it's usual for us to be out in our community. So I have office hours that are actually outside of my office every week. On Tuesdays, I'm in the coffee shop, or I'm in a building. So I will strategically place myself when I know that students are having those issues, or I hear or get referrals or anything like that. I'll pop a squad outside their room, their classroom, and when they walk out, I'm like, oh, hey, what's up? Can we talk? So that has seemed to be super effective. And I know that probably won't work with bigger institutions, but it's definitely, if you can, it's almost like the knocking on the residence halls, that sort of thing. That has super helped with our outreach, though, and it's made that connection with us, because as advisors, that's what we're doing. So hope it helps.
That's awesome, a great approach. And yes, as a larger institution, that's why our care partners are valuable. But actually, that's a great approach. I wanted to say, too, after Andrew made his statement, it brought something else in my, like, I happen to be working with the 2019 students that are coming in. We alternate years, so we have a bunch of years because it's the three of us. But I happen to be working with the 2019. And so creating my own structure until the official one is, I've begun looking at, because I get the entire cohort. And so I begin looking at things like the GPA that they've come in with, because the report shows all of that. And then also there's the immediate crash and burn. So I already have, in February, I already have 20 that I have cases on just based on stuff. And they may be okay, but right now they're not. And much of that has to do with transfer shock. And so really working through that. And this process, this case management process really helps to circumvent that and support the students. Okay. So do I have, where? Oh.
I saw this hand, and then I'll circle back.
Hi, Maureen Laird, University of the Pacific, small private in Northern California. Just a question about what you were just talking about. You're working with fall 2019 and then talking about reaching out to the folks in regards to the students that are coming for orientation. So are you doing, if you're looking at new admits that maybe have not confirmed yet, but you look at their cum GPA from the school they're transferring in from and you see some red flags, are you reaching out to those students prior to them confirming to say, hey, these are the resources that are available to you, not pointing a finger saying we think you're going to have a problem, but just in general, these are the resources that are available to you as a student. Do you do any type of that outreach at all?
Well, no. The long and short answer is no, we don't.
They may not come, first of all. So, and as we said, we have almost 60% of the population. So we have to, again, manage expectations and manage burnout. And so we do have our Office of Student Success that helps our students transition in. So while they may not necessarily reach out to them, if they've already been working with them at one of our community or state colleges, they actually will be supporting them through the process of coming in. Once they hit orientation, they're basically, they're there, then we sort of have a handoff. And again, as Andrew said, we're in the early stages, so we're really working that out to see how it works best. And our office, hey guys, our Office of Student Success, they're here. But we work very closely in terms of before and after, and we're working that through because again, we're fairly new. I would say about 2017, and before that, you know, they began the articulation program, but then when we began looking at it as the Office of Student Success and transfer advocates, we then had to begin to look at it much larger than we were initially. So the pathways that have been developed with specific schools remain, but we've actually expanded our work to be able to really give the attention and the services and the care that's needed for all transfer students. And there was another.
We also, we have a Twitter question as well about our rotation of cohorts, how we do that. When transfer advocates first started, it was just one, and it was Anthea, and she had them all. And that just was not feasible for her sanity or for her work-life balance. So basically, Andrew and I came on board last year to help her out. So as it were, I have all of the transfer students in 2014 and 2017. So all of those that came in, no matter if they had their AAs, if they were transferring in from another state college, another community college, that was mine. And then Andrew's got the 2015 and the 2018. And Anthea has the 2013, the 2016, and the 2019. So she's still got a lot. But that's how we kind of go about it. So in 2020, I will have that next batch of little ducklings, and we'll kind of go from there. So.
And let me say, sorry, let me say that because yes, now yes, there's still a lot. But one of the things that we're doing again as we shape this work, my more aggressive work is done with the 2019 because what we're really looking for is outcomes. Is there an impact when they have an advocate at the beginning? None of the others really had that. Andrew had just come in the middle of his group, so he didn't get that full year of, and then Cardi came in, and hers were just on fire. They were in bad shape because, and so she came in brand new, and the 17s were like, where have you been? So still work with 13 and 16, as you know, the goal is to, let's see what's happening here. Let's maybe direct you to, if you're eligible, maybe BGS, Bachelor of General Studies, or whatever it is, get you graduated. But in terms of really looking at from beginning and the impact that such a case management model will have, the differentiated pathways, all of that, hopefully the work being done now, we'll be able to understand its full impact. We know there's impact, but quantitatively being able to talk about it is where we're going with this.
And just one more piece about the cohort, because I do think it's important. The reason that we rotate in that fashion is so we, again, operating within the framework of our Office of Academic Advocacy, whose 2 missions are first-year retention and then 4-year graduation, we actually are doing that job simultaneously. So when we're onboarding a cohort, we're looking at retention, making sure they come back, and then in our other cohort, they should be about graduating at that time. So we've staggered the work so that we're essentially duplicating the work of our entire office, which is a team of about 14. We're doing that between the 3 of us with our cohorts, specifically within the transfer framework. We also separated out that way so that, kind of to Anthea's point, like as a student is getting a little bit further, in, and they're 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, a lot of times we stop directly and sort of aggressively case managing those students, but they still pop up in our like greater pools of data, if that makes sense. And even within those cohorts, we also talk about prioritizing the cohort. So we suspect, because we don't currently have performance-based metrics tied to transfers, but we suspect that it's going to be for those that come to us in the 2+2 framework. So we consider our primary cohort those in our year that came from a Florida AA. Then we consider like a secondary, just anyone that came in, like in that year as a transfer student. And then we have some tertiary cohorts even within ours that we would probably assume like any other student that didn't come from Florida that's not going to count really in what we are assuming is the metric. So we've aligned our cohorts so that we even have sub-cohorts underneath our big years, if that makes sense. Yeah, we addressed it, great. And we've had another question about preventative measures once students get on campus and are declared in a major. When we're at orientation, if we're working with a student and they're being reselected at the time of orientation, that is a huge risk indicator for us. And so we know that even if they do find a home, the fact that they were unhomed for a little bit at the very beginning, there's probably some risk associated there. So when we work with a student through orientation, and when we get them that early, they automatically show up and then stay on our radars for the time. Because again, the work that we do is all about understanding that everyone has some level of risk, right? And so it's the ebb and flow of when that risk is. So just because they came in, didn't have a major, were automatically reselected at the time of admission, essentially, there's probably going to be some additional issues that are going to come up later on down the road, even if we do get them homed properly at the time of orientation. So I want to be mindful of time. We have about 4 more minutes. So again, we have more facilitated discussion questions, but
Thanks. I was going to say that really the facilitated discussions were in case you didn't have questions. But guess what? You all were amazing. So we were able to at least address one. Important for you to know that one of the challenges with this work is, we balance institutional priorities, but also the student. And making that work. And so, yes, the goal is always to help them graduate, to provide the resources and support needed to help them get to that. But there's also the reality that if college is not for them, or if not at this time, that conversation also has to happen. And so we're able to do that realistically once we've looked at all of them, because keeping them there for them to continuously fail, gain further debt, as along with other things, makes no sense. So we end up really making sure that we consider the student in the process. We want to thank you because we want to respect your time. And if you have questions for us, we have our contact information on the And yes, we have some references there. And yes, that's right. They're on the handout. You can email us. We do have some cards here. Hopefully you got one of our handouts. If you didn't, we have more here. But thank you so much, and you all have a great evening. Rest of the day.